Hi, again, my name is Cassie, and this is discussion board 3. I'm going to discuss today the question, provide real-life examples of neighborhood effects on children and or families, and propose ways that local churches can help kind of offset some of those negative effects of those neighborhood effects. So I am a teacher, specifically a special education teacher for the last 5 years. And so I have seen lots of negative effects that lower socioeconomic status neighborhoods can get from those kind of neighborhood effects of not having those resources. So one of the things that I've seen in education is that our education, our districts for our schools are basically grouped by neighborhoods. And so if you tend to live in a lower economic status neighborhood, the funding for your school is based off of the income of your neighborhood. Which means essentially that those schools that are getting those lower economic status neighborhoods are actually lower funded than schools that are getting higher economic status neighborhoods. And so that means a lot of things. I've been in these schools for the last 5 years, and so it means that I have not been in a school with a library. My first school actually did not have an adequate library at all. We had a room in which there were very, very, very old books in which no students were interested in because these books were from when the school first opened in the 60s. And we also didn't have any funding to get new books. It was not in our budget to get new books, which created a problem because students weren't reading. They weren't not only reading at school, but they weren't reading at home because they did not have any books that were interested to them. This was a very rural community, and in order to get to a library, they had to go at least 20 minutes away, which, again, can pose a lot of risks because they're not getting those reading materials that they need to really up their reading abilities, which can affect their academic performance, not just in elementary school or middle school, but all throughout their life. Because if there is critical periods in academics. And so it's really, really important that those types of things are those fundings for libraries and books and those resources, technology. We had long-term subs in our rooms instead of actual teachers. And then the funding for teachers were cut, so teachers were having to teach multiple different classes throughout their entire day rather than just focusing on one subject area, which created a lot of problems not only with the teachers because then they were overworked and stressed, but that also created a problem with the students because the students were able to get multiple modes of learning, because if you have the same teacher teaching multiple subjects, they're not quite able to get those multiple modes. One teacher might teach something a particular way because that makes sense to them, and they're not getting it multiple ways. And then there's also they had less activities in childcare as well. So this was talked about in the article that we read this week, but I just wanted to kind of go over it because I think it's super important. So a lot of these students didn't have activities after school. There was not a rec center in their neighborhood or in this area at all. Again, their closest rec center was, again, 20 minutes away. We had parents that worked that could not necessarily pick their kid up after school, an hour after school, in order to have them participate in the school sports. And so these students were not able to participate in any kind of after-school activity, which made it difficult on the end because then they went home. They were again, they didn't have access to books and materials like that, so that led them to watching TV, which then either watching TV or going out and you would see, like, we had this in the neighborhood. It was common for students, especially in the middle school area, to walk, like just kind of walk the streets. And so you had elementary students hanging out with middle school students, which posed a major issue because they were being exposed to more things that were not of their age group because they're not hanging out with their age group and doing things of that nature. And so that causes a lot of socio-emotional problems. And then I think that we can do a lot of different things that could help this, especially from local churches. And some of these things are already being done. We did have one church with an after-school program in the area, but again, it was just one church that was, busing about maybe 20 kids from both the elementary and the middle school. And we needed more like them because they needed to go somewhere to be able to have someone help them with their homework. They needed someone to be able to, have those resources, the books, the teach them how to do research, things like that you typically would learn at home. But if you have a working parent, if you're in a lower socioeconomic status neighborhood in which you have no library, that's going to be very difficult to do. And so having the churches be able to provide the transportation for that, taking them on library trips, once every 2 weeks, things like that could really help expose them to those necessary things. And then they could also do tutoring programs in which, they're helping by getting those educational gaps, filling those gaps that are in the students' lives due to the lack of library support, the lack of funding from the schools and things like that. And then also they could volunteer in schools. This would help a tremendous ton because if you're able to donate books to classrooms, if you're able to organize the books that are already there, that would be of a great help because a lot of these things aren't happening in the schools because they don't have parents that are able to just come, any day of the week because a lot of these parents are working multiple shifts, multiple hours, multiple jobs, and that makes it very difficult. And so these are just a few of the problems that I've noticed with these neighborhood effects and some ways that I've seen that we could help it. I hope you guys have a great day.